Good afternoon. Let's face it, we all miss it. Singing at a concert, chanting in a stadium. The artists miss their audiences, the athletes miss their supporters, and the sports and entertainment industry misses a big part of their revenue. But with over 2 million deaths worldwide and no immediate end in sight for the pandemic, it might be a while until we go back to the good old days, if we ever go back. And since the show must go on, the real question is, how do we adapt? What can we offer the fans? How can we keep the sponsors involved? And of course, what business models are resilient and robust enough to weather these dramatic changes in the industry? And at the core of these issues, the only real question we should ask ourselves is, what type of relationships can we build in a contact-free world? I can't answer these questions. I'm just a journalist. But I'm delighted to welcome today for a 30-minute conversation someone who can. Ever since the pandemic began, these topics have been at the center of his task at Atos Global Head of Media, as Atos Global Head of Media Competence Center. So please welcome Marcos Gonzalez Flowers. Hello, Marcos.
Hello, Alexander. How are you?
I'm all right. I do miss it, honestly, as a sports fan. I do miss going to the stadium and chanting to support my team. But just to make sure that my assumptions are correct, do you think we'll soon get back to the way things were?
I think we will get back, but not soon. And it won't be the way that it was. The first issue we've got, of course, is 2021 is here, and still there's no end in sight of the pandemic. Once we start to open up stadiums, people will have to travel. Will they feel comfortable traveling? Internationally, will people feel comfortable actually going there? Once they get there, there's going to be the diehards that return, and they'll find with diminished, some social distancing, diminished volumes of people, the atmosphere is lost. We've already seen that. You said, the chanting at the stadiums. What do we see? Cardboard cutouts of fans and people trying to do like DJ or studio applause and canned laughter
with recorded
and getting it horribly wrong. So that atmosphere won't come back for a while. The people that do go may find it's not quite what they expected because the crowd isn't there. It's like going to a party where you expect loads of people to be there and there's 4 guys and they're all standing in the kitchen. It kind of loses the magic. So I don't think we're going to see it this year. I think we'll see a gradual return, but then it's going to be, what are the expectations of that fan base? Because one thing that COVID's done is begin to make everyone a digital expert. So people are now more savvy and more demanding about how they consume content and what their expectations are. So when people come back, we'll see. Go on.
All right. I want to follow along that, what you just said about how people got more tech savvy, because if we're not going back to the stadiums right now, the question is, how do companies and teams, they keep the fans and supporters involved? How do we make them feel like they're still a part of the show and more than just viewers?
Yeah. So the change. So let's first of all talk about what I mean by everyone's become digitally savvy. So I think about some of the older relatives I've got who Zoom was an expression of how fast something went. That's what they understood. Now they actually can communicate. They're quite savvy with it. They start having multiple conversations, different backgrounds. They're becoming more digitally aware and competent. And it was always going to happen. It's just the pace has now accelerated. So first of all, people are more willing to engage. The other thing is they're more selective about how they consume content. If it isn't what they want being broadcast, they're willing to go and find it. And they have the ability to find it. And they want to engage. And that's the key shift. It's how do you engage in things that have traditionally been broadcast at us? So we watch sports and we consume it. We don't get involved as much. We may comment with friends on social media, but really it's broadcast at us. And what makes it exciting is the unknown end. That's the difference between sport live and pre-recorded. So that engagement model is the key. We need to move away from just showing people content and engaging more and making people feel a part of a club, a sports club. So part of a football team, we're going to find more demands on the players to actually contribute more to the engagement. So for instance, sharing training events, the training where we actually train with our preferred sports idol in whatever the sporting is. Things like that will start to come into play, but it's going to be more about engagement rather than just watch the event.
So it's the end of just sitting on the sofa and watching the 90 minutes match, or maybe the before game and the analysis afterwards. It's really getting to select what you can see and when you can see it. So you're talking about an almost an embedded version of the fans in a way.
Correct. So there have been lots of experiments about giving people access to cameras to be able to pick the view that they want. To a degree, we're quite lazy, and a whole part of sports production is the producers, the directors being able to create a unique story as it unfolds. And that's what media is all about, telling stories. And so being able to capture that and create it in a captivating way, an engaging way for us. We give ourselves the ability to access our own. It's sort of interesting, but we don't have years of experience in doing it. So it is one aspect is picking different viewpoints, but the other side is maybe VIP viewings where you have a collective viewing experience where you all join some particular app to share the viewing experience with friends, with other spectators, and you collectively are able to comment on things, be able to put information in, pull out statistics, maybe watch your own replays of events and comment on it. So you start to become more engaged, not just sitting there consuming, and potentially doing it with other fans. So you start to get that community sense again.
Let's follow along this community experience, because there's a very strong group aspect in going to venues, games, and concerts. It's a group thing. You go along with with your friends. So how can we now make sure people experience the show or the game together, even though they're remotely? You just mentioned we can make comments on social media. We already do.
Yep.
But it's not the same thing, really. Like, as in turning to your mate
Yeah.
who's chanting with an awfully false voice. How do we keep together today?
So um, I think that if I'm thinking about some of the shows that I've watched recently, where they have the audience is on a massive Zoom call, and the audience can see each other on the Zoom call as well. So they can watch the show, but watch themselves as well. So you have, in effect, chanting with your friends or laughing with your friends. So you start to try to create that community environment. There is what COVID has taught us is really there is nothing that will substitute for human touch and interaction in the real time. The most that we can do is try to find ways to enhance an experience and give you a sense of community, even if you're not standing in the middle of it. And COVID has also shown us that we can create communities which are digitally devised and digitally presented. They are different, and they will be experiences where, as I said, you could potentially have the fans and your friends around the outside be able to select who it is. They could be other people who have paid for a VIP experience, which potentially gives them unique access to information, to content, to future tickets for viewing, to unique previews, things like that, to make it something where people feel they're part of a unique club.
Mhm.
It's, that's the key.
And
Go on.
as you mentioned, you said these experiments are already taking place. You just mentioned how fans can get onto a Zoom and sometimes fan in a Zoom laugh at what happens at their
Mm,
opponent's club. There are also already these systems where you can choose your cameras in Formula
correct.
One, for
Yes,
example.
that's right.
And I know that Roland Garros on their website already had a way for the viewers to select which game they were going to watch. Rather, so all of this is is not new really, but it's accelerating. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. It's all becoming, it's faster adoption. It's a lot of people would say, if you, a lot of people, they go to the big screen to watch the sports because it's more captivating, it's better sound, it's a big screen. Now the increasing number of apps and the big screen in your lounge becomes a screen which is actually a window to a world in which you can control more through TV apps and smart TVs and different applications. This was slow, relatively slow being adopted, but the speed is going to pick up because people are more comfortable with doing it. That's the big transition. The things that were experiments on websites, as maybe this will become interesting, are bubbling up to become the mainstream because it's the only option people have. You want to watch, you have to do it this way or you do without. And so the other thing it's doing, that particular view of the world, is and that digital savviness, being able to search for what you want, is opening up a greater world for minority sports. So sports that are less catered for because they can't attract the massive audiences that you would get from a normal broadcasted event, they end up with an outlet online, which, if they can move to more automated production processes, more remote production technology to reduce the cost, can feed in to satisfy the demand of more people who are interested in those minority sports.
I must confess that I recently discovered, and by recently I mean tonight, lumberjack sports. Completely randomly, and,
Yeah.
and it's a fascinating thing to watch. But you mentioned something that is key, which is remote access and to sort of drop the cost of all these productions. So we've talked about the fans' experience and how they can get involved. Now let's move to the industry side. Let's move to what it means to adapt from a sports and entertainment industry. You just said you'd have to create more content in the way that people will have to pick, people will have to be more with you. Does that mean that teams and venues and concert goers, or actually players, will need to be their own content producer? Will you need somebody in your team who's sort of, I don't know, live twitching or live streaming everything that happens?
Yes, I think what we'll see is, and we already see it, certain, especially the big teams, have their own presence, their own online presence, where they provide content. They have teams that go around. If you follow McLaren in Formula One, you can go on YouTube. They have their own channel and they go around, they do interviews with the drivers, they go through the pits, they show you different aspects to it. I think we will see that becoming far more mainstream and far more important. And the actual sports associations will start to create content which is unique to them, which they distribute online, to create and extend that relationship with the consumer who can't physically be there. Formula One is a great example of that. It has a loyal following, but they don't go to all the events unless they're really wealthy, because that's a round the world ticket every
Right.
2 weeks. And that's the other thing. You won't find a plane that can get you there at the moment. So, that's an area where already you can see the development of trying to create a different relationship with the fan through alternative channels. Now, that production cost, just finish off what I was saying about the production
Oh, yeah, go
side.
ahead.
If we look at the big issue with sports production recently has, when you shut down COVID and you shut down the sports activity, it's been devastating for freelancers in the industry. It has ruined lots of them. Small companies who live hand to mouth and plan for big sporting events without government aid, bankrupt, gone, because of the cost of producing sporting events. Lots of, in fact, some of our major customers are actually looking a lot more at remote production, automated production, use of AI to track balls and that, so that you can actually begin to get sporting content for minority sports with a minimal presence. So limited number of cameras feeding back over the internet, over web connections, to actually get content back and then streaming it. And doing it at a budget so you can actually offer more variety of sport for fans. So that's the big thing that I think will happen in terms of broadcast. We'll see more low-end sports being televised because it can be done cheaply, and because there is an audience out there that can now find this stuff themselves. They don't have to go to the big screen.
But you just said it would be televised. If we sort of take that trend and take it as far as we could see it right now, if the teams or the bands get to create their own content and sort of broadcast it through their own channels, which would be online because it costs very little, does that mean that we would still need to broadcast it on the TV? You know, that completely changes the way we broadcast
Right.
sports, and therefore also completely changes the revenue stream. So how does that market even work?
Okay, so let's look at what's been happening in scripted pre-recorded content. Yeah. So Netflix and Amazon were the big gorillas that came in first. Netflix was the big one that came in first. They're unique. Don't forget, Netflix was a DVD postal service originally, and their unique proposition or their value was there were no late fees for returning the DVDs. They then moved into online distribution and set themselves up and took the world by storm. Amazon came in with Prime, realizing again similar, this is an opportunity, and they've kind of become the big players. But content is king, and their content comes from a bunch of studios who produce it. Sometimes indies, independent producers, smaller studios, but very often some of their key content came from a very big studio, Disney. And you look at Disney, they realize that actually, why go out through traditional channels and dilute our margin if we can go direct to consumers and control the relationship and distribute our content, our rights, and take all that revenue to us instead of diluting it. And what's happening? They're pulling their shows from the likes of Netflix and Amazon. They are releasing what would have been cinematic releases direct to consumer on their platform. They are building their own relationship, and their subscription rates have rocketed beyond their original plans. Now let's take that into the sports world. How does that work in the sports? Well, it's not a massive leap to say, as a sports association, I own the rights and I sell them to somebody, and I choose what rights I sell. I don't have to sell every right to everything that I have. I can constrain some of it, and I can sell added value direct to consumers. So I can still sell the main rights. If you look at ESPN Plus, ESPN Plus is the ESPN online streaming service for sports, and they at the moment stream on ESPN Plus this kind of they do like the university football and stuff like that. They keep the Premier stuff for online for live broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the advertising revenue for Super Bowl 2019, $336 million of advertising revenue for a 3-hour, 45-minute event on one day. That's phenomenal value associated with it. So people will be, or the broadcasters and the owners of the rights are going to really be like, I don't want to let go of that until the last minute, when I'm absolutely certain that I can still get revenue through another channel. But that move to taking on some of that, taking some revenue by adding enhanced extra bits of content to the consumer in a direct to consumer model, will have to come out. Because if I connect with the consumer, I connect with the fan. If I engage with the fan, I get loyalty and I get intimacy. And if I have intimacy, I get a bigger share of the wallet.
These values that you just mentioned are pretty much key for sponsors. intimacy, connection, engagement. This is all, all the reasons why they're paying to be there at the venues, why they're paying to be visible on site. They pay for this exposure, but how do sponsors sort of relate to this new world that you're describing? How can you ensure this exposure if the experience becomes fully digital?
So, well, first of all, it used to be that when you had a digital experience, you could fast through any adverts, you could get through the sponsorships. That's kind of taken away if you've got AVOD advertising, video on demand advertising funding. I think that for sponsors and for the sports associations and sports clubs, they've got an opportunity to actually extend the engagement model for their sponsor and for themselves. What I mean by that, very often, sponsors they sponsor, they put the mascot running around is their product, and it's a bit like an active billboard. It's not that much on an engagement level with a consumer. It's like, hey, look, we sponsored that. That's really cool, isn't it? It's on a shirt. If you can find a way to actually extend that relationship, and if you can do it through an online connection, once you're online, the key about online is that when you're online, you've got the ability to connect with an individual. You've got the ability to engage, and I always talk about this idea of engagement. Engagement. It's not broadcast at. It's not understand my customer. It's not It's all that. It's engage and develop an intimate relationship. Once somebody's online, you can connect to them. Rather than do it en masse, you can start thinking about what they used to call arbitrary lot sizes in manufacturing, a connection which feels intimate and personal. If I can do that because through a sporting uh, connection, as a sponsor, I can still connect and try to be more relevant. What it could turn out doing is starting to mean that sponsors are more picky about who they sponsor, because they may be sponsoring something which is a favorite sport of the CEO, but actually, when they try to connect, there is nothing for them from a how do you extend and develop intimacy with my product and the customer.
Mm.
So there'll be more understanding. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm seeing sort of the benefits as a sports fan myself.
Mm,
I'm sort of picturing this moment where I get to see added value content, where I get to pick which player I can follow, where I get to be in the room with them. But as if we go to the industry side, um, this shift towards a digital oriented experience, it sounds a bit costly. I mean, will you have to invest heavily to upgrade the venues, the stadiums, so they can offer this
yeah.
experience?
No, I think, and the reason I say no so adamantly is the promise of 5G. So everyone's waving 5G as the panacea to solve all the illnesses of bandwidth consumption in the world. I do believe that there will be a benefit to 5G within locations, because you won't need to try to connect to a local connectivity within a stadium. You'll be able to use your own data potentially. There are other benefits. You could have local connectivity in the stadium, which allows people to connect and become online. But that's when you're physically at the stadium. If we look at the other aspects to it, if you're talking about capturing content, feeding it back to distribute it online, then actually that doesn't have to be a massive expense. What it needs is creativity and understanding and a bit of a marketing organization that goes beyond the traditional channels, because that's really what we're talking about. How do you change the way you do that?
Mhm. To all of you, I mean, if you're a sports fan or a venue goer, you're probably quite enthusiastic about this conversation. Do know that you're a part of it. You can ask your questions, and I'll relay them to Marcos at any time. Marcos, I want to sort of broaden a bit our perspective, because it's quite easy to imagine converting sports events into a digital platform,
Mm.
even maybe, shows. I mean, concerts are with a proper digital strategy, they can be very immersive.
Yeah.
But what about other types of events? Corporate events, trade shows, meeting, maybe conventions. How, all these
Oh,
places where we would gather,
yeah.
have content, have interactions. What's going to happen?
So I've just been through exactly the experience of that in my own organization. So in Atos, there's an annual show that happens every year, internal, where we bring together 400 of the top execs into an event to actually have talks, look at the future, and then they have a session outside where they get to network and move about and meet other people. And we normally set up stands like a show. Yeah. And so this year, because everyone's in lockdown, we did it all online. And the idea was, and these stands are basically the different divisions that we have within our organization. So it's all internal. And so we had a really good thing was set up where a three-dimensional image of an event was set up. And so during the breaks, the people could go online. They're online anyway because they're at the show. They could then go out, walk through the show, and go and talk to different events. Basically, go to myself. I was in the media element, so they could go to the media stand, click a button, and have a conversation with me.
Mm.
So on the surface, that looked really good. It looked, hey, that looks kind of cool, looks kind of fun. But the reality of it is it didn't really work that well. And the reason it didn't work that well is if somebody wants to speak to me within my organization, they send me an email with an invite to a meeting, or they click on one of the different conversation tools, collaboration tools we've got, and I have a chat.
Mm.
So why would they go through a 3D image, a virtual reality experience to get to me to ask me and speak to me? They'll just do it. Sporting corporate events like that are about networking and about personal interactions. The breaks in between are about people who don't often get a chance to have a coffee and a conversation together, chatting, walking along, bumping into somebody they know in one of those booths, or stepping up and having a conversation with them, and then going on to the next one as they chat, maybe making it, maybe not. The key thing is they are very much a personal thing. And when we try to replicate online the personal experience of, as I said at the very beginning, that there is no substitute for personal interaction. If you try to replicate that online, replicate the chance encounter that people have at an event like that, replicate the interaction at a personal level and networking at a personal level, you can't do it because it's not the same. You're not bumping into somebody and just having a conversation. So I think that there is a place for the utilization of collaborative tools in a corporate environment that allows for an immersive, interactive event to take place. I did one yesterday where we were launching something to 300 people. In fact, we did it in 3 tranches, so there's about 1,000 people that we were connecting with online at the same time. The problem is you'll end up with tiny little pictures of everyone around the
Mm.
side, or just the pictures of the panel, like you would in an audience debate, and a presentation at the front. So that worked, yeah. And
Mm.
many people have done that, and it happens regularly. That works. What we haven't figured out yet, and I'm not sure what the answer is, to be honest, is
Mm.
how to take that personal networking experience that we get from big shows and events. IBC is a classic one. This is an example.
Mm.
How do you take that? I bump into somebody, I have a conversation, I make a connection, I see somebody, oh, how you doing? I haven't seen you for ages. How do you turn that into a digital experience?
That does raise the question of these new tools and technology, and that will be my last question before we move to the audience's question. Is in order to be more engaged and more immersed, be it in corporate events like you just mentioned, or going back to concerts and sports shows, what technologies are we talking about? You just mentioned AI to sort of lower the cost
Yeah.
of being the director of the show, but what about augmented reality or virtual reality? Are we
Yeah.
moving in that
So,
direction?
so I think, so when we look at it, so virtual reality is one of the ones that everyone goes mad about. Great fun, pretty low cost. Will it really go full mainstream? Because that's the thing, it's about volume. Yeah, it's about how many people can you actually touch and engage with and get going. How do you get to a critical mass that has sufficient return for you to add and add and add and add capabilities to it? So virtual reality, yeah, could be. There are some aspects there. Augmented reality, probably more interesting in certain events. One of the great things, if you watch like sometimes when they do the practice laps of Formula One and things where they have the second car, where they have the ghost car following it round to show you the comparison. Doing that with downhill skiing would be another one, to compare the lines that different skiers take. That sort of thing is something which I think has got a place and becomes more interesting, and you can give it to people and they can experience it at the venue, at the event, when we get to go back. And this is the bit about, as people become more technically aware and more digital, they will want more from the experience. They will want something extra that makes attending an event, having the atmosphere of the crowd, but also make it something that I've got that nobody else can have because they're not here. So if you want to get people back to ticketed events, if they've started to consume online and found it a fulfilling experience because they can engage in different ways, then you're going to have to find a way to make the physical being at the event a unique experience which sets it apart from the online one. That's all about fan engagement. We've been doing a lot of work in that domain as well.
I have a question from one of our viewers who would like to know your thoughts about platforms such as Netflix or Amazon, and can they be the next broadcaster of the sports industry? And I would add on my side, Netflix, Amazon, and maybe DAZ. Sorry, DAZN. I was trying to spell it out, and I'm French, so it doesn't work out. Or DAZN. Can these be really the future outlets?
So DAZN is already kind of the dominant player in the most advanced, in the as if you like, the Netflix of sport. So there isn't currently a Netflix of sport. And what I mean by that, there isn't one player that dominates the world for distribution of live sporting content. There's a couple of different reasons. There are obviously live streaming has challenges associated with actually latency and getting the content there. Because if you watch pre-recorded content which is being downloaded or streamed to you, what you don't realize is there's a point of presence located, a content delivery network, and in there is probably the complete, Netflix has a copy of its complete catalog dotted all over the world to actually make sure that the streaming service can be provided.
So that we don't get it from too far away.
Yeah, you get it too far, too many people, the buffering, it all slows down, it becomes a nightmare. So they can do that because the content is all pre-recorded. When you start delivering streaming of live content, it's not pre-recorded. It has to be delivered. So you have to build a bit of a delay, a bit of a buffer to cater for the fact that it's going to be a delay in the way it's replicated and streamed. So you end up using different codecs to condense the signals, etc. So that's one of the challenges, is the technology, although that's getting better every day, to be honest. The other one is the rights. Look at DAZN, has been very successful in particular areas where there is less penetration of subscription-based rights broadcasting, where there is certain sports which aren't necessarily covered, so the competition for local rights is less. So I think they are in the right track. It is the direction of travel. Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, they're looking at making, they announced at their recent corporate meeting, the big push into South America for online distribution of sports content. So I think that there will be the emergence of some key players. And it's down to, and again, COVID may drive some of that, because if you think about it, the rights holders are paying big money for distribution to broadcast content. Yeah. But if people are starting to consume it online more and more and willing to go to more places, those big subscriptions, that big ability to control the flow of broadcasting starts to get whittled away. Then suddenly it's harder for them to drive and say, right, I'm going to go and pay 6.3 billion for the Premier League rights in the UK. If the Premier League decide to broadcast themselves and can get enough revenue from advertising and direct from sponsors and their own subscription, they start to pull away from those key players. But I think there is still a home for a main player out there, especially to deal with minority sports, which actually the live element may not be so important because it's the recording that's valuable. Go on.
You were mentioning the Premier League. I'm thinking about the French Football League, which is a bit in a pickle as we speak, and who might be thinking about that. I have one last question, and it comes from our viewers as well. We've just talked about the COVID effect and how we could still engage, but as you mentioned, there will be a day when we can all go back, perhaps safely, to venues or stadium. And one of our viewers asked, how can technology, or what type of technology can help in a safe reopening?
That's the other thing. When we talk about going back, how will we feel safe to go to the different events? Well, one aspect is biometric scanning. So being able to actually identify. There's a big hoo-ha and discussion going on about vaccine passports, being able to confirm that people have actually been vaccinated. And there are people who are saying, no, we refuse to be vaccinated. Potentially you want to exclude them because they may have some virus mutant form which actually can attack. So I think that we'll start to see increasing, if you think about sporting events, how can you be safer? First of all, look at turnstiles, biometric to control access of who's coming in. I think you're going to get that anyway. That's been sort of a trend increasingly for other security reasons. But then the control of traffic, and by traffic, I mean the flow of people, the concentration of fans once at a venue, to be able to guide them through. The best example I have of that is I like skiing. And one of the worst things, anyone who skis, or I snowboard now, but anyone who does that knows that everyone hates the queue. It's, apart from being a break, when you can get out a snack, which you can do on the chairlift, other than that, it's like, oh God. And you tend to come down and realize you've come down the wrong place at the last minute when you see the massive queue. So in Canada, in Whistler, I was skiing a while ago, and at one of the main stations in the center, they have a list of all the lifts and a traffic light system to tell you the level of queuing that's available at that lift. So if that was online as well, then before I pick the run I'm going to take, I could see, actually, if I go to the bottom here, that's going to be really busy, so I'm not going to go there. I think that when you think about sports events and sports venues and dealing with that, people going to the bars for snacks, etc., going to different areas, I think what we'll see is ways in which you can monitor the volume of crowd to keep a degree of distancing, to stop people bunching up. In the UK, in Heathrow Airport, we've had terrible scenes of, at the moment with COVID, people stacked up in the entry hall. Why they don't create something which actually controls that flow more effectively. And that's the sort of thing that I think we'll see, more control of identifying who's at the venue and controlling their flow to avoid sudden surges in key areas.
Well, that's maybe one of the ways we can sort of all get back together and chanting in stadiums or singing in concerts. Until then, dear viewers, we'll still have to engage that way digitally, to be with our teams, to be with the people we like to follow. This is the end of our digital conversation. Hopefully, we'll get back together soon to a venue where we can be, much more free to engage. But until then, Marcos, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, all of you, for your attention. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have a great rest of the Global Sports Week.